Hey, how are you? It's Alan here from Looking for Warriors, and I'm watching John Taylor Gatto right now on YouTube. Watch John Taylor Gatto. It's just so important. And he's giving the items that private elite schools, they're not just private schools, but elite schools for elite families, what they're taught when they're growing up, that your kids are not taught, and your kids won't be taught. This is not in your curriculum. Deliberately. You're not supposed to know this. And it's so easy to know it. But instead of knowing this, your kids are going to be given busy work. Your kids are going to be given busy work. So they're not learning this. So I'm going through what he's talking about. It's so important. Now, number 3 was the thing that caught my attention because we're in a very interesting time right now. And I'm in Ireland, there's people in Dublin marching on the streets, and there's people in London marching on the streets, and there's probably people in America as well. And a whole bunch of other countries which I haven't mentioned. I'm sorry if you're in a country that I haven't mentioned. But there's people marching everywhere. And what he says, this is number 3, what he says, that elite private schools teach their kids that your kids won't get taught. Very deliberately. It's very important your kids don't know this, so I'm telling you. Is an insight into the institutions that run every country, or the institutions that are set up, the important institutions in each country. And I know with my own kids, I have really clever, intelligent kids who ask me really good questions. And we talk about this stuff all the time. All of the time. And I give them my honest opinion. And I'm open to their honest opinion. I want them to come back. And sometimes I'll talk to them and give them my honest opinion, and they will argue back in a different way and they'll convince me. So I'm not interested in being right necessarily. It's okay to be right sometimes, but I'm not necessarily interested in just being right. I'm interested in what is the truth. And different people can have different truths, but there is a truth. So he says, John Taylor Gatto says, kids in elite private schools are given an insight into the institutions in each country. The courts, the government, the military, major corporations. They're given insights into these things. This is so important. What is the high court? What are the lower courts? How does it work? How do you act when you're in a court? What do you wear? This is interesting to me because he goes on to explain that, and this, he's dead now. He died recently. And this was recorded, I don't know when this was recorded, but it had to be 5 to 10 years ago. And that was not the current times. He wouldn't have even known what was going to go on in the current times. But what he said was really interesting, considering what's going on in the current times. He says that they're giving an insight into the major institutions, and public schools are not. Your kids are not taught this. And how you know that they're not taught this is that newspapers and media and governments will say, and this is prophetic considering this is probably 5-10 years ago, at times like this, at difficult times like this, we all need to pull together and look after each other. We all need to pull together. And what he says is that is not American value. Now, I will say that's not a Western value or whatever country you're in, because this is not just America. These are values of people all over the world. That is an un-American value, he says, to pull together. In fact, free speech and being allowed to protest and being allowed to say what you want to say, that is what's important. Because the only way to get the truth, this, I'm paraphrasing a little bit what he says. It's not exactly what he says, but this is, if you want to hear him, you can go and hear him. He's on YouTube. And I suggest that you do, actually, because he's an absolute genius. But you're here now, so you listen to me. But he says the real value is not in everyone agreeing with each other and pulling together and doing what the government wants. The real value is free speech. Being allowed to protest, being allowed to say no, consent. Consent. So each business has a responsibility for public health for sure, but also it's up to them to consent or not to consent. Each individual can protest, and I hear a lot of people these days saying, oh, those people, those idiots protesting. I don't know if they're right or wrong, and I don't care whether they're right or wrong. What I do know is they have the right to protest. And it's what John Taylor Gatto was saying, that your kids are not given insight into how these institutions work, so they can't change them and they can't protest in the right ways. And it's so, so prophetic what he said, that we are told the right thing to do is to go along, to do what we're told, to do what the government tells us. But that's not the right thing to do. Your opinion might not be the same as mine. I probably have a different opinion than you, but the only way I can get to the truth is if, and this, even with my own kids, I talk to them and they disagree with me all of the time. But the only way I can get to the truth is to talk through it with them. And if they bring up an argument that I can't refute, then I've got to change my mind. That's the way to get to the truth. Not finding out what the biggest authority is going to say to you and doing what they say. That's not truth. That's argumentation from authority. And it's not truth. Truth is only when we can be free to argue with each other, even online. Maybe not Twitter. I don't argue on Twitter because it's just hate. It's just gamifying hate. And that's not calling people names. That's not getting you where you want to go. This is what you're taught in elite private schools that you're not taught in the public school. Gamifying hate on Twitter. That's not it. But being able to make an argument, and to talk it out until you get to the truth, and maybe you never get to the truth, but you get a lot closer to the truth than you would just going along with what authority says. So this, for me, was so prophetic what John Taylor Gatto said. The elite private schools, they're taught about the institution, they're taught about how to affect the institution. They're taught about how to make changes in the big institutions, the corporations, the governments, the military, the courts, how to make big changes. And your kids are not supposed to know how to do that. But they should know, and that's your job, because they're not going to get taught. This is Alan here from Look for Warriors. Do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, particularly if you like John Taylor Gatto. We're going to talk about him a lot. He's just amazing. Absolute genius. Subscribe to Look for Warriors.